Hi, everyone. Welcome to the March 13th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona, and I'll be joined very shortly by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, as usual, we'll be handicapping the upcoming weekend's races. The focus this weekend will be at Oaklawn Park, where they're running that Derby Prep, the Rebel Stakes, the penultimate Derby Prep down there before they run the Arkansas Derby next month. 50 points on the line to the winner of that race. They've also got a couple of interesting undercard stakes for the older horses, which we'll also discuss. We'll move on to Santa Anita to discuss the one Grade 1 race of this weekend. That's the Beholder Mile out there on Saturday. And then we'll wrap things up by talking about stakes races from Laurel Park and Gulfstream. Craig, there's been a lot going on just generally in the news this week. We had that big bombshell on Monday, but that seems like forever ago at this point in time because there's just been so much happening in the country in general over the past few days. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm just like most people, kind of holding in, seeing what's going to happen. And I'm not rushing out and stocking up on toilet paper or anything like that. I think I'll be okay. But I'm really interested to see how things work out with racing this weekend. I have to be honest. I think we'll probably get through this weekend, but I won't be the least bit surprised if this is the last real horse racing we see for a little while.
Yeah, it remains to be seen. I think people this week, with a lot of the news that broke in the sports world, in the entertainment world, are it's hitting closer to home for people. I mean, it's one thing for experts to reveal numbers and say, this percentage of people are going to be infected or it's going to spread this quickly. But I think once you actually see like real examples of how it's affecting you and your plans, that's when people really start to realize that this is serious. And for the horse racing world, I mean, I don't think we'll be that far away from hearing stories about stuff happening on the backstretch or prominent racing figures. And I'm not saying that to be a Debbie Downer. I just think that's inevitable at this point. So we'll see how that's all handled over the next several weeks. But I'm kind of in the same boat with you with what I'm expecting. We'll just take it day by day. And hopefully everyone out there is doing okay and not getting too anxious over the situation because it's not something to panic about, but it's something to take precautions as you move forward over the next few weeks and months.
Yeah, no doubt. And inevitable is the perfect word. I mean, it's going to happen. So it's just a matter of how it's going to affect the game. It's affected everything else. So I really don't think horse racing is going to be any different.
Well, let's dive into the racing because I'm pretty sure we'll at least be racing through Saturday. And we're going to talk about a bunch of Saturday races on this podcast. Let's start things out in Hot Springs, Arkansas at Oaklawn, where they'll be running their card on Saturday like today without spectators. We'll begin with the 8th race, the Essex handicap, going a mile and a 16th for those older horses, 4-year-olds and up. And this drew a pretty evenly matched group. We've got a bunch of horses coming out of that Razorback that they ran there about a month ago. The 2nd, 3rd, and 4th place finishers from that race are all back in here. Bankett's the favorite on the morning line. Not surprising because he's the one that really gave the winner of that Razorback Warriors Charge the biggest tussle last time. Bankett, I guess he's the horse to beat, though I'm not sure he's going to work out as perfect a trip as he did last time.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Bankett. We've talked about him on the Pacecast many times. I think he's probably right at the edge of his distance limits, and he's a horse that I think might prefer shorter, 7-8 furlongs at the most. And it's one thing to keep in mind. He's kind of had moderate paces to close into last time. And we were talking about a horse that might be distance limited. That's something that actually helps him. So while he's an off the pace type horse, when you go these longer distances or maybe pushing the edge, I think the slow pace actually suits him a little bit, where he'd probably tire a little more going longer. But that said, he's certainly not without a chance here, but it doesn't look like a great setup. Again, there's not a whole lot of speed in this race. Warriors Charge didn't show up. I read he's waiting for the Oaklawn handicap on Arkansas Derby Day, I believe it is, or at least it's that weekend. So not a lot of speed, and it looks to me like Pioneer Spirit, if his jockey shows some aggression, which he didn't last time, David Cohen, I believe it is, he could have the lead all to himself here, and he's proven to be very tough when he gets that. So he's kind of where I'm starting my handicapping in this race.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I kind of do think the Pioneer Spirit is the horse to beat because, well, he didn't have a bad trip last time. He did have to alter course heading into the first turn when Jovia kind of angled outside so dramatically and it forced him to steady a little bit and really tuck in behind the leaders. It's not a bad trip, but I don't think it's the ideal trip for Pioneer Spirit. And in this race, he is likely to be outwinging on the front end, and I think that's the way that he really does want to run. So they're all going to have him to catch, including Bankit. Maybe that gives Pioneer Spirit the advantage. I do think he's the horse to beat. We'll see what kind of price he goes off at. If I was going to take a shot with one price horse in this race, the one that I would go for is Bravazzo. I know that he's been off form recently, but sometimes these D-Way Lucas horses just take a little while to come around. This is now his fourth start off the layoff, and I didn't think his Razorback was that bad because he was really wide for that entire race. He broke from post number 11. He was wide into the first turn. He was 4 wide and got pushed out to 5 wide on the second turn. So he really did lose significant ground, and he only lost to Pioneer Spirit by about a length at the end of that race, and Pioneer Spirit saved a lot more ground than him. Bravazzo does have to improve, but I don't think there's as big of a gap between Bankit and the rest of them as some people might perceive. So maybe Bravazzo could connect at a price.
Yeah, if there was one more horse I was going to add at a price, it would be a big price horse, and that's Guess Sweet. I really liked a couple of his dirt races that he had run previously until that last time. And that last race with Warriors Charge, there just wasn't a lot of pace. He kind of got stuck up in traffic. I didn't have anywhere to go. And I'll be the first to admit, he didn't have much run. I don't think he had a whole lot of an excuse, but I almost think that race was too bad to believe. So if he's anywhere near that morning line of 30-1, I'm going to have him on my horizontal plays as well.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago that he beat Snapper Sinclair. He's going to be a much shorter price in this race, so I'm not going to talk you off that long shot. Let's head on to the filly version of this race, although a bit higher quality, a grade 2 event, the Azeri going the same distance, 1 mile and a 16th. And this race is basically a rematch of that quartet of fillies that we saw in the Houston Ladies Classic just over, or about 6 weeks ago, as Lady Apple snuck up the rail to beat her common rival, Serengeti Empress, Street Band, and My Lady Curlin. If you're a trip handicapper, that's a race that you definitely want to scrutinize a great deal as you're making your picks in this race. How did you see that Houston Ladies Classic? Who did you think was best in there? And is this race going to set up differently?
I do think this one's going to set up a little differently. I think the leader is going to be the same in Serengeti Empress, but I think she's going to have things a little easier that time. She was actually pressed that day by a pretty quick sprinter whose name I forget, but it was actually a horse stretching out, and there's just not that kind of speed in here. So I do think she's going to have a bit easier of a trip this time. I mean, that's no real enlightenment. She's the morning line favorite. I'm sure she's going to take some heavy action at the windows, as she almost always does, but I really do think it's a little different setup for her. The horse most likely to press her, I guess, is All Emma drawn outside, but she really doesn't have the kind of speed that Serengeti Empress does. And you also have to look at the trip Lady Apple got in winning that race in the Houston Ladies Classic. No knock on her at all. I actually liked her that day, but she just had a perfect trip, snuck through on the rail. And even then, she was very hard pressed to get up and beat Serengeti Empress. So I really do think the race goes through the favorite here, and I think she's going to have things her own way.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what happens with All Emma in this race, because I do agree that Serengeti Empress is faster than her just based on all of the data that we have. But if you watch All Emma's races, they are doing everything they can to get her to slow down. She is just one of these horses that wants to run off in the early going. She's actually, I think, faster than a lot of her pace figures might indicate if she gets into a race with a really fast horse, because it's everything they can do to get her off these slower paces. We'll see what plays out there, but I would imagine she's going to be not too far off Serengeti Empress in the early going and perhaps pressing her. Whether that makes Serengeti Empress vulnerable is another matter. It remains to be seen. Serengeti Empress, I agree. She set an honest pace last time. I still thought she maybe should have held off Lady Apple that day. Although Lady Apple, she has clearly improved lately. She was very much a last time was the time horse because she was a big price in that Houston Ladies Classic. And as you said, she got that perfect trip coming up the inside. So I don't really want to go for her either. And I'm just going to land back on Street Band. She was the one one that I thought lost the most significant ground in that race. Wide for most of the way, had to swing 4 wide around the far turn. Sure, she did hang a little bit in the late stages, but I thought maybe the ground loss could have accounted for that. And she's just going to sit a pretty good trip, a little farther off the pace, but it's not like she's that slow. I don't think she's got to come from that far out of it. She's typically pretty aggressive herself under Sophie Doyle. So I think Street Band could be coming on late in this race. And just from an overall talent standpoint, I don't think she's really that far behind horses like Serengeti Empress, and especially not Lady Apple. So I'll take a small shot with Street Band.
Oh, yeah, I have no problem with that. She's obviously a very good filly. I mean, she's already a Grade 1 winner. And this is, you have to say, this is a really deep field. I mean, these are some real quality fillies and mares we have in here. So looking forward, I'm sure we're, assuming things go as scheduled, we're going to see a bunch of these back in the Apple Blossom, which is run at the same distance. So this is as good a race as it is. It's a preview for an even bigger race in the same division.
Yeah, and I know we talked about it right after that Houston Ladies Classic, but once you get past Midnight Bisou, it's pretty wide open for the second spot in this filly and mare division. We'll talk about some of the others in the Beholder Mile when we get there, but it seems like these 3-year-old fillies that just turned 4 now, they're definitely in the running to be among the top horses in this division. Let's move on to the main event at Oaklawn on Saturday. It's the 10th race, that Grade 2 Rebel, the prep for the Kentucky Derby. And this is a pretty interesting field. I know for some reason they were originally talking about breaking this race out into divisions. I guess they were originally expecting a much bigger field than they ended up getting. But I think it's a nice field of 8 horses where you can make a legitimate case for about 6 of them. The main focus, though, is on Nadal, who I think a lot of people at this point consider to be one of the leading Kentucky Derby contenders. He's getting a big test here because he's only gone 1 turn so far. He has run some speed figures that say he's among the fastest 3-year-olds out there, but he's going to have to show up in this race because I think he's got some legitimate rivals. He's drawn down towards the inside, which probably is not the ideal post position for him because he does have a pretty speedy horse and no parole to his outside. I just think he might be a little bit vulnerable at what figures to be a very short price.
I do as well. I'm not against him by any means. I fully expect him to run well. But, I don't know how short of a price you really want on him. He's 5-2 on the morning line. I think that's a pipe dream. He's probably going to be 4-5 in this field, if I would guess, just based on his reputation and his trainer, Bob Baffert. As you said, he's going to have to deal with No Parole, who has been a really quick sprinter. I don't like No Parole at all in this race. I'm going to toss him off all my tickets, but I do think he's going to be a pace factor for sure. I'm wondering if the plan is to just kind of let him go and maybe tip out a little bit, see if you can sit off of him. But, plans don't always go to the way you want them to. So just saying you want to do something and have it actually happen with 1,000-pound animals plus is a whole nother story. There's definitely some other interesting horses in here. Silver Prospector jumped up. I know we both liked him in the Southwest last time, and he did get a perfect trip. But I don't want to take too much away from that performance because he ran fast that day. He got a 1:18 TimeformUS speed figure. And while he did wind up getting the perfect trip, some of that was of his own making. He showed a real good burst of speed to actually secure inside position without getting shuffled back too far and was able to take full advantage. So I like the athleticism I saw out of him that day, the versatility. So I think he's a very formidable foe. There are a couple I'm not so high on in here that are actually pretty low on the morning line. And I'll start with 3 Technique. He's a horse who visually has been very good going all the way back to Saratoga. Even in defeat one time, he kind of got a big reputation when he lost the Beast, and he came back and broke his maiden very nicely. But for me, he's never been a particularly fast horse. He was a bit disappointing in the Smarty Jones in his 3-year-old debut. But, that is a race I kind of put a line through for them. So he just ran okay. But I'm still waiting to see the big fast race for him that kind of enhances reputation because I haven't seen it yet. And I'm just not the fan of this horse at a short price. The other one we're going to talk about is Basin, who actually beat 3 Techniques, as I mentioned, when he broke his maiden. And he's a horse who actually did run fast as a 2-year-old. He won the Hopeful. I don't really have any knocks on him other than Steve Asmussen's not really a guy to bring horses back top notch off of a layoff. Not that he can't do it if he has to, but it's not really his MO. So I'm not expecting him to be fully cranked for this one. I would expect more from him the next time.
Yeah, we have a pretty similar take on all of those horses that you mentioned. I'm just going to backtrack to Nadal for a second because there are a couple trainer stats that I want to make people aware of. The one thing that's kind of interesting to me with Nadal is that Bob Baffert's taking the blinkers off for this stretch out in distance, and it's actually not a really good move for Bob Baffert. I looked up the stats in Formulator over the past 5 years, taking the blinkers off in graded stakes on the dirt. Bob Baffert's just 3 for 17 with an ROI of 60 cents. So that's maybe not a positive for Nadal, even though he's probably doing it to get him to settle down in the early going, understandably. Nadal is bred to stretch out. I just have some reservations about taking him at a short price, as do you. I agree with everything you said about Silver Prospector. In some ways, Silver Prospector is kind of the horse to beat in this race because he's got that solid last race that's fast over this course and distance, and he's likely to work out a very similar trip here. So I don't think he's one that you'd want to dismiss by any means. I respect him totally. The other Asmussen horse that you mentioned, Basin, I think he does have ability. I liked his Hopeful last year. How much the sloppy track helped him that day, I can't really say. And he's another one that is certainly bred to stretch out in distance. He's by Liam's Map, who, if you look up the preliminary stats that Liam's Map's been compiling as a sire, his horses have been doing really well on stretching out in distance. His dirt route numbers, the percentages are kind of through the roof right now. They're going to have to moderate at some point, but he's really doing well with his horses going long. And this horse, Basin, is actually a three-quarter brother to a horse named Rise Up, who was a multiple stakes winning dirt router back in the day. So Basin's certainly bred to go longer. It's just, as you said, Steve Asmussen does not have great statistics off layoffs like this, specifically 150 days or more in graded stakes off that kind of layoff. He's 0 for 4. And the surprising thing to me about that stat is that the sample size is just 4, indicating that Steve Asmussen, it's not a typical move for him to bring horses back off long layoffs in ambitious spots like this. So I'm somewhat against him. 3 Technique, I'm a fan of the horse. I liked his race in Saratoga last summer, as you know. I kind of like you, though. I'm waiting for him to run that faster race. I do also wonder if he's ultimately going to be better going a one-turn distance, given how explosive he was in that 7-furlong race last summer. We didn't see that kind of move out of him in the Smarty Jones, but I guess the pace of that race could have compromised him a bit. I'm going to go in a different direction. And the horse that I like the best in this race from a value standpoint is the number 8, American Theorem. If this horse's 2-year-old form, I went back and reassessed it and was more encouraged than I was, I think, just remembering this horse from last year, because he was pretty green in that debut at Del Mar, and he put in an encouraging effort to win that day. And then second time out, it's a big ask to make a horse go from 5.5 furlongs all the way out to 1.16 in a Grade 1 race in just his second career start. And he held his own against that field. I mean, he was no match for 8 Rings, but that's turned out to be a solid race because clearly Storm the Court came right back to win the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Shoplifted was also in there. He's come back to do well in subsequent starts. And American Theorem, I just thought he was a little green still that day and ran well regardless. Obviously, he was off for a long time, and he's coming back off a layoff here, and those are all hurdles. But I've been watching a couple of his recent workouts on XBTV, and he just looked like a green horse last year. And in his recent workouts, it just looks like the light bulb's gone on. He just is trading so well coming into this race, and he looks like a 3-year-old that might have really grown up from his juvenile season. And I like the outside post position. If he works out that kind of stalking trip that the pace projector indicates, I'm hoping that maybe he's fit enough to get the job done here, because I do think he's got more talent than it might seem.
Yeah, he certainly showed some talent as a 2-year-old. He ran fast. As you said in his debut, he was green. He's still got 101 Timeform US speed figure, which in August for a 2-year-old. I'm sure we talked about him on the Pacecast because I'm sure it set off some bells. And the second 8 Rings was good. He got a 105, so I have no problem at all with him. I haven't had a chance to go watch his workouts. I actually plan on doing that, but there was a reason I didn't mention him negatively with some of the other horses, because I really don't have any. It's just a matter of if he's going to come back sharp and good enough. Before we move on, I do want to hear, I assume you don't like No Parole as well in here?
Yeah, I really have nothing to add to what you said. I just think that he's been beating up on vastly inferior competition, and this is a real class test for him. And also, I get the sense based on his pedigree that he's ultimately going to be more of a one-turn kind of horse. So I do think he'll be a pace presence in this race. I just don't really like him from a value standpoint or really anywhere in my wagers. I think there are just too many other appealing options, and you want to let value be your guide in this race, because it does feel like the kind of spot where Nadal could really get bet down and perhaps create some overlays in other horses. So just be aware of that as you're formulating your wagers. Let's move on to Santa Anita and discuss that Grade 1 race for this weekend, the Beholder Mile. And this one actually drew a Grade 1 quality field, I would say. I mean, we've got some really nice horses from last year, like Ollie's Candy, who was competitive in a lot of those top races out in California. But the favorite clearly is going to be the number 1, Hard Not to Love, who was the Grade 1 La Brea winner, 2-back, coming off another victory at 7 furlongs in the Santa Monica. Like Nadal, though, this will be her favorite, trying something for the first time, as she's stretching out to the 2-turn mile distance here. Do you think that's going to be a hurdle for her? Is that a reason to look elsewhere? Because she is the fastest horse in this race based on speed figures.
She is. I'll be honest, this isn't a race I love from a betting perspective. I think it's going to come down to Hard Not to Love, Mother, and Ollie's Candy. And none of them are offering particularly a lot of value. I'll monitor and see. Maybe something could change, but it's one of those, none of them jump out as horses I love. It's a race where the pace projector doesn't foresee an extreme pace scenario. There's no fast pace or slow pace flag. I did want to discuss 2 of the top 3 coming from that La Brea, where they both got big figs that they haven't been repeated. They've both run well since. It's come back to be a pretty strong race from a result standpoint, just not from a figure standpoint. And the reason I wanted to bring it up is it's just one of those races where I think you have times where the pace is so fast, it just draws out the absolute best and the maximum effort you can get from horses. And I think that's what we saw with Hard Not to Love and Mother. You don't always get those circumstances, though, so it's not a crazy thing to think that they could run back to them if they had to, but they don't know. It just comes down to race setup. It's something that I struggle with as a speed figure maker, saying, is the figure wrong? Is it not? And as I look through the chart today, I kind of glanced, and all the horses down towards the bottom of the field have run basically the same figures. So I think it's just one of those where the pace was so extreme. It is possible we overrate the horses, but it's also possible it's just kind of optimal conditions to produce the best races those horses are capable of. That said, if I had to pick a horse on top in here, I'd probably go with Ollie's Candy. She's been just as fast as Hard Not to Love on some occasions. She's had some curious rides to my eye recently, but I think she's every bit as good as them and is likely to be double the price of her in here.
Yeah, I agree with your assessment of Hard Not to Love and those speed figures. I mean, if it is high, it's not by a whole lot, so I'm not going to harp on that too much. I think the real question for Hard Not to Love is stretching out in distance. And I mean, there's that old Harvey Pack adage, never bet a favorite, trying something new for the first time. And that's certainly the case with Hard Not to Love. She does have that edge on this field, but I'm a little bit concerned about the stretch out. She will get some pace to close into here, so that's going to help her a little bit because I do think they could be moving up front. And she's bred to stretch out because she's a half sister to Wonder Godot, who obviously could win going as far as they rode races. So that's all going for her. I just don't want to take a really short price on her, as good as I do think she is. I've got no problem with your pick, Ollie's Candy. She makes plenty of sense. I didn't love the ride that she got in the Zenyatta 2-back when they elected to take her off the pace. I thought she actually ran a pretty encouraging race in the Breeders' Cup last time. She's got to come off the layoff, but John Sadler obviously is doing well lately, and I think she might be able to handle it. So I would certainly use her. The horse, though, that really interests me in this race is the outside horse, CC. She, too, has to answer the distance question, but this is a horse that I think is has the potential to do better and run faster than she has so far, because she looked pretty good as a young horse last year prior to that Acorn. I know we were kind of skeptical of that Lady Ninja figure at the time in her second race, but Lady Ninja's turned out to be a really good horse out of that race. And CC was ambitiously spotted at her third start in the Acorn. That was one of the best fields of 3-year-old fillies that was assembled last year. And while she was clearly no match for Guarana, the winner, it should be noted that that Belmont Stakes Day card featured a significant rail bias, and CC was out in the 4 path for almost the entire race. She was a horse that could have been really badly compromised by the track bias that day, and she didn't run that badly to be fourth, earning her typical speed figure. And given the bias situation, she arguably could have done better that day. And she came back off a very long layoff last time, and she just was never asked for her best in that allowance victory. I mean, she won in hand so easily. I don't want to say how much faster she possibly could have run, but it was a very visually impressive performance. And now now they're stretching her out again. She's certainly bred to stretch out because she's a half-sister to Papa Clem, who was running in those big 3-year-old races a number of years ago. I think he was even in that Rachel Alexandra Haskell back in the day. And I just think Cece is a horse that we haven't seen the best of yet, and she might be able to take a step forward here off the layoff.
Yeah, I like that selection. And one thing I would say, too, is to keep in mind, like you said, she wasn't asked for everything last time. She ran a 112 TimeformUS, and she had basically run that same figure 3 times last year. But those 3 times last year came early in her 3-year-old season. She didn't run after June. So if she's improved at all, like most horses do, she could easily run a figure in the 120s here.
Let's move on to Laurel Park, where they're running another race for the 3-year-olds. It's the private terms, going a mile and a 16th around the 2 turns at Laurel Park. That start where they head right into the turn. They're almost starting on the turn, so you want to be wary of horses with outside post positions in these races. But I thought this was an interesting race to discuss because you've got a lot of horses trying the 2-turn distance for the first time. You've got some horses coming out of that Miracle Wood, which I'll let you talk about a little bit because it was an interesting pace dynamic there. This race is not one where the pace projector is predicting a fast pace, but there are some key speed players in this race.
There are. I mean, I think it's pretty clear. Lebda, who's drawn in the 2 posts, so almost inside, and Took Charge, who's drawn outside for Chris Englehart, are clearly the 2 speeds in here. They're both trying, well, I guess Lebda earlier in his career had tried 2 turns at Churchill once, but for the most part, he's been running 7 furlongs, 1-turn miles. He did so without a lot of success in the Nashua, but he's obviously a very fast horse. He's going to take a lot of money in here. As far as the speed goes, he does have that post position advantage. If you're not familiar with Laurel, they do post all their replays on YouTube. It's probably worth finding a few mile and a 16th races and watching them, so you can visually see just how short that run up is into the first turn, because it is really short and it can often be decisive. Because of that, it often does favor speed horses. That said, even though the pace projector doesn't flag this as a race projected to have a fast pace, I think it's almost inevitable with those 2 in here. And you could also throw in Awesome Party, a Todd Pletcher trainee who's shipping in and broke his maiden wire to wire last time at Aqueduct. I think there's going to be some real speed in here. So because of that reason, I decided to look elsewhere. There's a few in here. I think Big City Bob is probably the logical alternative. He ran a decent third, the well-beaten third in the Grade 1 Champagne behind Tiz the Law and Green Light Go, a couple horses I'm sure all our listeners are familiar with by this point. Tiz the Law may very well be the leader on the Derby Trail in a lot of people's minds. So I have no problem with Big City Bob, other than that he is the morning line favorite in here. And I actually landed on a horse who draws inside. He actually broke his maiden in a 40,000 maiden claimer last time, but he's a horse who's been running similar speed figures that we see from the other horses, and that's My Friend's Beer. He's also done so coming from off the pace, which I like. He's done so in not favorable pace scenarios. There's a lot of blue pace figures coded in our PPs from his last couple races. It is also his first try around 2 turns. That is a bit of a not a given. He is a half the Shamrock Rose, who won the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint when she was, I think, a 3-year-old. So maybe he has a little sprint in his pedigree, but he's going to be a much bigger price. And his running style leads me to believe that the extra half furlong in turn might not be too bad. So I'm taking a swing at a price in here.
Well, I don't have a whole lot to add to that because we see this race very similarly. I'm on the same page with you about the speeds in this race. Lebda, I thought he ran really well in the Miracle Wood. I just don't know if he strikes me as a 2-turn kind of horse. I think it's going to be tough for him to get that distance, and Took Charge on the outside. I mean, his pedigree looks all sprint to me. I don't see him getting this distance. I think he's a horse with real ability, but the dam side of his pedigree especially, his dam is closely related to that Indian Blessing family So I just an Axeman. So I just don't think he's really going to be better going longer distances. Like you, I've got no problem with Big City Bob, who just seems like a logical horse to beat in this race. But I also thought My Friend's Beer was really interesting because he's been steadily improving with each start. His speed figures have been upticking ever so slowly, and he's really not that far off from a speed figure standpoint, the top contenders in this race. He's not quite on terms with a horse like Lebda, but I kind of am thinking that Lebda might take a slight step backwards here. And My Friend's Beer, I think what you said about the pedigree is fair. It can go either way. He is by Stay Thirsty, who gives some route influence. The one thing I don't like about My Friend's Beer watching his races is that he's one of these horses that never changes leads. And I never like to see that. I mean, he's an experienced horse now, so I don't think it's just greenness. I think it's just the way that he runs. He did hang a little bit last time on his wrong lead and not get by that leader. But the horse that beat him in that race, Pitching Ari, I think he's won 4 in a row now. I don't know why he's not in this race, but he seems to be pretty good down at Laurel. So I just think My Friend's Beer might be overlooked in this race, as you said. And he's really not that far off the top contenders. And we'll see if it works out the right trip, but it seems like it's a possibility. Let's finish things up by going down to Gulfstream Park to talk about the Grade 3 Hurricane Birdie, their feature there on Saturday. 7 furlongs the distance for this one, and this is arguably the most competitive race we're going to talk about in the podcast because it's hard to know who the favorite's even going to be. They all look so evenly matched. The 2 horses that might vie for the early lead are Blamed and Pause for the Cause, and I think both of them will attract some support here. Blamed is coming off an optional claiming win last time at Gulfstream against a weaker field, though she faced a lot of these common rivals too back at the Inside Information, and a quick pace did her in that day, so I think you want to be wary of how fast she's going to have to go up front.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think probably the 2 horses are going to take the most money are the 2 speed horses. Pause for the Cause is tabbed at 6-1 on the morning line. I'm not buying that for a second. I think she'll probably be the favorite or the second choice. Horses they have like Wildwood's Beauty is listed only 4-1. Has never run races on this level at all. So I just think those 2 are going to take the bulk of the money. It doesn't mean I'm thrilled to bet them because I'm not. Both have some question marks. As you said, Blamed kind of beat up on a real easy field last time. She was terrible the time before that. So it was her first time off a layoff, but she is going to have to deal with Pause for a Cause. I'm curious what you think about Pause for the Cause, because she's a horse who personally, I just don't think she likes slop. If I look back through her PP, she's never run particularly well on an off track, and I am expecting a rebound. I'm just not sure if it'll be good enough to win in this field, especially having to deal with Blamed.
Yeah, she's an odd horse for me to judge here because I don't know. I mean, coming into the last race, I thought her sloppy track form looked fine. I mean, from a speed figure standpoint, while she never won on it, her speed figures were pretty consistent with her fast track races when you look at her form back then on sloppy tracks. So I don't know. I didn't see that as a big excuse last time. I mean, she did have to go the 7 furlongs as well. Maybe that got to her. She hasn't loved that in the past. And she's going 7 furlongs again here. So be aware of her perhaps getting leg worry in that final furlong. Yeah, I don't know. She was supposed to beat that field. Kept True, who was second, has turned out to be okay for Leah Girardi. The curious thing, though, is that, I mean, there's a race in New York this weekend, which we're not talking about, the Correction, where she would make a lot of sense to be running in. Why did they ship her down to Gulfstream as a New York bred? I mean, I guess they're trying to get her some graded stakes black type. Kieran McLaughlin, I assume people have seen the article that he's getting out of the training game. So maybe this will be him going out on a high with a graded stakes winner. We'll see. I just thought it was odd to see her in this race because she's a horse that I think of as running primarily in New York. I'm not going to pick her in this race. I certainly respect her ability. I just think with Blamed in here, she might have a little trouble getting the distance. Of the horses coming out of that Inside Information, the one that I like the most personally, and it kind of surprised me when I landed on her because she's not the horse I like in the past, that's Nona Madeline. Watching back her Inside Information, she really blew the break that day. I mean, she broke about 2 lengths behind the field, and Jean Velasquez really had to ride her to get back up into the race. I mean, she was just a length off the leaders by the time they were leaving the backstretch, and that was a fast pace, so she had to run faster than Blamed in the early going, and all things considered, she did pretty well. I mean, she had to alter course again at the quarter pole to duck inside to find room, and she finished up pretty well that day in a race that totally fell apart. I mean, Pink Sands passed them all, so I just thought that was a really encouraging second start back off the layoff for Nona Madeline. I know the speed figures say that she didn't improve that much, but I think the performance is better than it seems. And she does have a right to really be a force in this division now, because a lot of her prior races, they were as a 2-year-old or they were off a layoff. So I don't think we yet know how good she really is. And I think we could see her best performance yet on Saturday.
Yeah, I was going to say she's another of those horses that's still a young 4-year-old. She had quite a significant layoff, so we don't really know what she can make, what she has in the tank if she's back in top form. The horse I wound up landing on, and I'm probably biased because I'm friends with the owner, C.J. Johnson, is Sally's Curlin. She was a horse who really came into her own last year. She's going to get a nice setup. She wound up winning the Grade 3 Chaluki and a 1-turn mile at Churchill. She tried 2 turns in the Fall City, didn't run well, and has had some time away, but it just looks like a race I think is really going to set up well for her. She's also a lightly raced 4-year-old. Those 112 type speed figure she was running when she was hot last year could be even higher this year. And I just think it's an ideal spot for her with Blamed and Pause for the Cause in here. And I do want to add, I had to do a double take when I saw Pause for the Cause in here as well. And generally, I'm not a big fan of horses shipping from New York down the Gulf Stream. It just... Over the years, like you, I've been following this game a long time, even longer, because I'm a lot older than you. And it's just never been a particularly good move when horses go from the dead of winter to the heat of Gulfstream. You will see the occasional exception, but it's just not something I like to hitch my wagon to.
Yeah, the one other thing about Pause for the Cause, not to spend too much time on one horse, I totally agree with that assessment. It seems like they shipped her initially to run a different race, because if you look at her workout pattern, she had a workout at Palm Meadows in late January and then didn't work for almost a month after that. So I wonder if there was some setback that caused her to miss a race they were pointing for. And now this is kind of the second option. So I don't like to see that either, but I agree with what you said about horses shipping up from New York to Gulfstream. It's not something I often like. Sally's Curlin, the thing that I'll say about her, and I'm not going to knock her because she's a decent price in this race. The pace really does. It's going to be dependent for her, but her PPs, they don't look that dissimilar to the PPs of Pink Sands before she beat these horses in that inside information. So I think if the pace does fall apart, it's going to allow a horse like her to be successful here. We'll just see how fast they go up front. That is all the racing we're going to discuss on the forecast this week. Since we are racing through this weekend, as far as we know now, I assume we will be back on Tuesday to do our typical recap of these races on the TimeformUS Pacecast that day. But for now, remember that you can always listen to us on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud, wherever you get your podcast. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel so you can hear us twice each week. Craig, good to talk about the races this week, and we'll be back again on Tuesday.